Welcome to this Listen to Others conversation. I'm Nita Wiggins, and I'm connecting from Paris, France to New York City, where author extraordinaire Gloria J. Browne-Marshall is going to talk about her latest book. Gloria, thank you for your time.
Bonjour. Thank you for having me.
I couldn't help it. When I heard about She Took Justice, your latest book, I had to have a conversation with you. So start us off, chapter 1.
Well, I'd like to introduce you to Queen Nzinga. And Queen Nzinga became the warrior queen known throughout the world, but in certain places not known. We should know that Queen Nzinga starts my book because the African American woman begins in Africa. And too often they begin our stories in slavery. And I understand that, but that's not where our story truly begins. And Queen Nzinga represents the DNA in Africana women in the diaspora because she is this warrior woman who fights the Portuguese. She's in 1622 sent by her brother, the king, to negotiate a peace treaty with the governor of Angola. They have sent from Portugal a person who's going to be now known as the governor over the people who have been there in what was Ndongo before, renamed Angola by the Portuguese. And in 1622, she sits down with this entourage of the government to negotiate this peace treaty. But I don't say sit down lightly, because when she arrives in Luanda, Angola, to negotiate this peace treaty, there's no chair for her. So you have all of these European men seated, and the governor seated, smiling, waiting to see what this African is going to do, because they don't believe she deserves a chair, that she's so primitive, she's used to sitting on the floor. And so Queen Nzinga scopes out this and looks to her hand servants, her women who have dressed her, oiled her, filled her with golden bracelets, and she claps her hands. They come forward and kneel down and make their backs her chair. And it's from their backs that she negotiates all day this peace treaty. When you go to Luanda, and I was there in 2019, and you see all these images of Queen Nzinga, and she is really revered, not just there, but any place anyone would know of this warrior queen who, when the Portuguese broke the peace treaty, she had took over the kingdom from her brother, who died mysteriously, and has guerrilla warfare against the Portuguese for decades. But I think it's important for people to know that there was an African Queen Nzinga, that she did fight the Portuguese to try to stop the slave trade, that she was a warrior queen and died peaceably in her bed at age 80. They never captured her.
And I should mention, Gloria, that you are a playwright, you are a civil rights attorney, you are a professor of constitutional law. And this book does bring in all of those aspects in the lives of women. And I see the passion you have when you talk about this. So tell me, why this book? Why now? Why you to write it?
Well, as you pointed out, I am a legal historian. I was working on a book, Race, Law, and American Society, 1607 to present. And that book did very well. But I thought, wait a minute, I'm seeing all these Black women as I'm doing this general research about race and the law over a 400 years period. And there's no book about them. But not just that, there might be a sporadic book about Sojourner Truth or, Harriet Tubman. But what about the lineage? And so I speak of the Black woman. I use the phrase, the Black woman, to tell the story of the Black woman. So this is our African American female story that's being told through the lives of Black women, from Queen Nzinga up to Shirley Chisholm for this part. And so what I'm talking about is our path, the path that's been taken by us as Black women, and how that path began with a foot of law and violence on our backs. But even in the 1600s, we rose up. And so our first lawsuit that I talk about here in the Virginia colony, in what would become the Americas, is a lawsuit by a Black woman who's fighting for her freedom, her independence from slavery. And so that was in 1654. So you can imagine if we were getting a lawyer and going to court and fighting for our rights in the 1600s, that the foundation that would give us Kamala Harris today, that gives us Michelle Obama, this has been long rooted in Africa. This is in our DNA to fight back. And we already know in our personhood, and I'll say this with all due respect, even in the most dire moments of enslavement, when we were bred like animals, some of us, there was always a light inside that said this was wrong. And even though you're using law against us, one day we're going to rise up. And that light is what kept us alive to this day, the light that still burns in us. And so when I'm telling these stories and She Took Justice, I'm following the light. I'm following the light from Africa up to this point, to follow the light that says, I'm not going to believe what you say about me, even when the law says it, society says it, you treat me as though I'm less than human, but I do not believe it. And they even use religion to say that we were less than human. And even then, we still didn't believe it. And so that lack of belief in the torment, torture, and ugliness and diabolical scheming crushing the Black woman did not crush us to the ground far enough for us to give up on ourselves.
Never given up. One name that we do learn in school is Dred Scott, but I am pleased to see in your book the name Harriet Robinson Scott. Fill us in, because her story needs to be known.
Dred Scott versus Sanford went to the Supreme Court in 1857. It ruled that a Black man had no rights. A white man need respect. No right of citizenship, no right even to bring a case arguing that they're free. And that is just what Dred and Harriet Scott did. They brought a case together. As a matter of fact, the case was, of course, Harriet's idea. So Harriet and Dred Scott had lived in a northern part of the country where it was a free territory, and they were working under Dr. Emerson, who was a military doctor. And of course, as you know, in the military, people are moved around. So he had been moved by the military into this free state. Well, Harriet knew that once you're in a free state, you're free. And the whites knew it. And they thought, because Africans were not allowed, who were enslaved to read or write, they thought that the Africans didn't know it. But of course, by word of mouth, we knew it. And so Harriet said, let's not go back to Missouri, which is a slave state. Let's stay here. But because they were being treated well by Dr. Emerson, Dred, who wasn't listening to a Black woman, went back to Missouri, and Dr. Emerson died. And so no woman could have property in her own name. So Mrs. Emerson had Dred and Harriet Scott and their 2 children, 2 girls, now under the rule of this crazy brother of hers, who started to beat them and treat them horribly. So Dred Scott brought a suit against Sanford, the brother, and that's the Dred Scott versus Sanford lawsuit. But it was Harriet Scott who told them to sue. I mean, so when we're thinking about Black women, it wasn't just for her, it was also her 2 daughters.
Yes. You have 308 engaging pages. We've talked about Queen Nzinga, but Shirley Chisholm is modern day. And even as a child, I dressed up as Shirley Chisholm for Halloween. So talk about something modern. Give us a sense of a modern story in She Took Justice.
Well, we'll say with Shirley Chisholm, what's so important, this slogan, bring us together, which is the political poster for Shirley Chisholm. People know about Unbought and Unbossed. I don't think they know about Bring Us Together, which speaks more again to the point that the nation was divided. The nation was very divided during that time period in 1972. And then here she is speaking of bringing us together. And of course, Fannie Lou Hamer's poster, this one's unique because Fannie Lou Hamer is just known as, not just, but she's known as a voting rights advocate who's done so much in voting rights. She's known about speaking at the Democratic National Convention, but she's not known for running for state senator. And what's so awful about this is she runs for state senator after sacrificing everything. Fannie Lou Hamer was also given a hysterectomy. And they used to call it a Mississippi appendectomy. And she did not know that she had been involuntarily sterilized. She had gone through so much, her life was shortened by that beating. And when she ran for state senator, she lost. She lost. Many of the Black people, remember, the Black population is larger in many places than the white population, and they were too afraid to vote for her. Fannie Lou Hamer did so much for so many people, and yet she could not get their support. And when she ran for office to better serve their needs in state government.
It's often a book that gives such rich detail and such legal precedents. We don't really see the photographs of people. Why make that choice?
Well, I'm also a college professor, and I teach law. And sometimes when laws are depicted, or lawsuits, even famous ones like Brown versus Board of Education, people don't know that Linda Brown is a little girl, a little Black girl in Kansas. I mean, we need to know that these are human beings in these conflicts, and they had lives, wants, desires, passion, fears. And so when you show the photographs, you actually show Vivian Malone, who desegregates the University of Alabama, with George Wallace screaming in the doorway, segregation now, segregation forever. You have to see that not just the stoicism, but the pride and the dignity of these women. One of my favorites is Daisy Bates, the activist Daisy Bates, who was so glamorous in Little Rock, Arkansas, but she was also attacked. They used to send her telephone number and address around the same way they do now with the internet. They used to do it then. So she would get these harassing telephone calls. She would have bombs thrown in her window. I mean, many things happened to these women, and still, like the City Federation of Colored Women Clubs in Jacksonville, these women came together under threat. And we need to learn from these pictures, learn from these stories, that these women were alive, they existed. They weren't just lawsuit party names. You know, they were living people, and they were human. And so that means that whatever they did, we can do too.
A closing thought in something I was reading about the book. It says, the Black woman liberated herself. Do you love that phrase as much as I do?
When I wrote it, I thought, I've got to put this in the prelude, because it's got to be understood. So many people believe that a Kamala Harris comes out of the 21st century. Kamala Harris is Queen Nzinga. You know, when you think about so many of us during that time, and Queen Nzinga and other warrior queens, and I begin the first chapter naming some of these African warrior queens, so that we need to understand that we have always fought for our own liberation, even when men, women, Black, white, and others did not believe in our liberation. Black women still fought for it. And the suffragettes movement for Black women was a suffragettes movement for liberation that she had to go alone and do, because there were many Black women who did not have the support of Black men or the support of white women suffragettes. So yes, we liberated ourselves, and we didn't become smart. The opportunities finally presented themselves for us to show just how smart, creative, and tenacious we are.
Okay. Gloria J. Browne-Marshall, thank you for the conversation. I can't wait to get my hands on this book. I've read your masterpiece, The Voting Rights War, so I'm looking forward to this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you. More power to Black women.